What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of the Sheehan Show. Me, Sean Sheehan, here on Sherdog.com. And today I'm bringing you a PFL 2024 year in review. And today I'm just talking about the PFL, the season itself, and a couple of the events around it. I'll have another show talking about Europe, another show talking about the PFL MENA, because I think they deserve their own, I suppose, standalone, because they had very interesting years, both of them. So today I'm just talking about the PFL. And I suppose, the general feeling, and for all my reviews this year, I'm going to do this, maybe the general feeling, then we go through it card by card. I'm going to put in the 10 PFL events here, plus the two kind of, how would you put it, super fight events, I suppose as they're called, the one at the start of the year and the one at the end of the year. And I'll do the first one first, then I'll do the 10, and then I'll do the one at the end of the year, even though the super fight one came before the 10th card. But I think that's probably a cleaner way of doing it, so we'll do it that way. But before we get into those cards, just the general feelings around PFL and all. Now, I want to... this is... people might give out to me for what I'm about to say here, but let me just preface what I'm about to say with... I just said a minute ago, I'm keeping PFL apart from PFL MENA, PFL Europe, and Bellator as well, importantly. I'll do another show, likely talking about Bellator here as well over, in the coming days. And I think if you were to put PFL by itself and take all the rest out of it, and look at just the fights, maybe not look at what happened outside, maybe not look at what we were expecting to happen, I think we got a pretty good year. We got some good fights. We got some really, really good fighters. There weren't that many injuries. There's always, one or two, and especially, I think there was a couple of heavyweights that didn't make it through and things like that. But every single one of the champions went 4-0. Every single one of the champions obviously came through the season format and won it and looked really good. And by the end of it, you're talking about, and we'll get to the champions in the end, but you're talking about people who are not only champions in the PFL, but they're being nominated for Fighter of the Year, Female Fighter of the Year, and all of that. So to me, that's a success from the sporting point of view. Now, if you want to talk about like the merger and Bellator and all that, I might do more of that over in the Bellator show. But for the PFL show itself, and for the fights just themselves, I, as someone who has covered them all, previews and post shows, I've honestly really enjoyed it. And like something like that, like I think for the UFC as well, for a lot of people like myself and people covering it, there is a tendency for it to become a bit tedious, but I think the fact, like I'm looking here, that like the 12 shows, especially like the 10 seasonal shows, what I enjoy, and I know some people don't as well, but this is a Sheehan show. I'm going to give you my opinion, and I've been steadfast really in this opinion. And I know a lot of people don't agree with me. I like the fact that we have 3 shows, we have a while off, we have another 3 shows, we have a while off, we have another 3 shows, and then we have a massive finale. And they're all leaning to that massive finale. They all have meaning in all of the fights. I know a lot of people are like, oh, the tournament doesn't work, it'll never work in MMA and all this. But what I think it gives, the thing about tournaments, the thing about seasonal shows, they still need big fights, right? They still need big fights. If, whoever was to fight whoever, 2, big stars have to fight each other, Brendan Loughnane against Hizriev, if it happens, in the middle of the tournament or wherever it might be, if people, want to see it, or, if the Chev is fighting, she's must watch, doesn't matter when she's fighting, that's big, and you need that all the time. But what you also get from the season and the seasonal format and the tournament format is fights that, and I won't name any names here because I don't want to be disrespectful, but fighters and fights that really, maybe they're not the best fighter in it, but this fight has meaning because it's part of the season. Maybe they lost their first fight and they need to get a knockout in this. And or maybe they're like, I just came in here, I'm a young fighter, I'm trying to win the million, I'm just clawing my way through to win it. Now, I know that, and I'll reiterate this again, I know that's not a draw for a lot of people, right? But I like it, and I enjoy it because, And maybe this is a hardcore thing, but like if you're watching all the PFL fights and all the Bellator fights and all the UFC fights and maybe a few more after that with Octagon or KSW or Cage Warriors or whatever it might be, right? You were watching a whole load of fights. Some of them have massive worth around them, like all the PFL $1 million fights, the UFC title fights, the Cage Warriors title fights, or big main events or whatever. But then you're watching probably 10x the amount of that don't have that massive meaning, right? I'm talking about like UFC, even UFC. Let's say UFC pay-per-view undercards, 10 fights in the UFC Apex show, 5 fights in the UFC normal show that have great meaning for the fighters and great meaning for their families and teams and everything like that, and that should not be discounted by any means. But for the fans themselves, for people covering the sport, they just don't have the meaning and are not going to get the airspace of the other more important fights, and they can't. Like, that's natural. But PFL have found a way to make them all matter. To make, like, I do UFC preview shows over in Severe May. I do, obviously going back over the betting show and doing different things here. And, like, there are fights this year that I've just, the UFC fight, and I skipped that, I missed that. Doesn't really matter. These two guys or two girls, they're not going to be contenders anytime soon. If they are, maybe I can go back and watch it or whatever. If I miss it on a Monday morning or whenever I'm doing a podcast, people are not going to be like, here, Sean, what, you didn't talk about that. Whereas if I miss, Dakota Cheva fight, or I miss, John Jones fight or something like that, I'll be like, why'd you ignore that type of thing, right? But with PFL, you can't ignore any of them, because you miss a fight, someone wins, they're in contention to get through to the playoffs and get through to the final. Now, that's a very, I suppose, and like, what does that do, right? That makes them matter in the short term, right? Not even the medium term, but the short term. Like, you win 2 fights this year, you're probably getting through, and then you're very close to fighting for the big belt in PFL. They matter. Everything matters. Every fight matters. And I know that's their line and that's all, but it's true. It is true. And maybe you don't get caught up in it, and maybe you're not, maybe you're not caught up in the tournament and in the season and all of that. But I think sometimes look, I'm guilty of this myself in all parts of it. Maybe we're a little bit begrudgy, or maybe we're a little bit too, this is rubbish, I'm not, I'm done, my hipster, I'm not watching this type of thing. Maybe we've a little bit of that in MMA as well. Maybe we've a little bit of that, right? And maybe we're like, tournaments will never work. But like, I think if we gave it a chance, which I kind of have, I suppose, I actually think it does work, and it is good, and it makes the fights that don't matter in some promotions matter in PFL, right? Now, having said that, this is purely, I think, from a sporting and fighting point of view. If we're talking about, the money and whether it'll be a financial success and all of that, that's another discussion now. And as I said, you need the big fights to make that happen as well. So I think that's maybe a discussion for another day. But from the sporting point of view itself, with 10 cards a year, the end you get a few millionaires. To have all of those fights leading up to it, and not all of them, like obviously so we have a couple of damn squibs and stuff in there, but I think that's good. I think that's good in a world where we have these UFC prelims that just don't matter a jot. I'll take that all day, and I'll take that all day, and I don't care if people disagree with me, right? I don't care. So there you go. Right, let's get into the cards and let's talk about them. So let's start off with the PFL super fights, which went down on February 24th. And you know one thing as well, I'm glad that coming up next year, the PFL are starting off a little bit earlier. They have the Road to Dubai card at the end of January. I think these cards at the start of the years, and I know it's like a historical thing, like, we don't do any MMA in January type of thing. I think they wait too long. Like February 24th for the super fight card, and then April 4th until the first regular season. I just think that's too long. You're giving up a third of the year there, basically, like. And I understand. Like I definitely give them a break because I understand what they were doing this year in terms of the merger, and that they didn't have like the Champions Series, and things are will be changing next year. They said there's going to be more cards or something, so maybe that'll be a little bit different. Although we're kind of getting close now, so maybe we want to get those cards announced. But like hopefully it will go there. But I think PFL are missing a trick by not having more fights earlier in the year. I know maybe selling tickets and stuff is not that easy after Christmas. It's tight, financially for people. But, I think one show a month, even if you were to do that, I think do a January, February, March show and then get going in April. I think that'd be a good way of doing it. But anyway, that's me, I suppose, nitpicking a tiny bit. So this first card of the year, this was the PFL versus Bellator Champs. And I suppose it's funny, you look at the main event, it was Sheehan against Ryan Bader. And the PFL won that one pretty decisively, won in 21 seconds. And we know we'll talk more about him and Fahey later and what he did. But this was really dominated by Bellator. And I think, like, a lot of people were like, oh, this makes PFL look bad. All the Bellator champions are beating them. And I was kind of saying, they're PFL fighters now, so it doesn't really matter. But I wonder, like, who was getting fooled by that? Like, Bellator have been around for a long time. They'd invested in younger fighters, and had brought them along, and made them into real stars. Whereas PFL, obviously it hasn't been going as long. The format obviously is very, very different, and it's not a format that's conducive to winning it 3 times in a row, or winning it 4 times in a row, or holding a belt, or being a champion for 4 or 5 years in a row, like the normal promotions, let's say, are. So it was always going to be an issue. I think like that. It was always going to be that way. But there were some very interesting fights on it, I thought. The Johnny Eblen Kassanganai fight was probably the standout, I suppose, in the co-main event, and that was split. I think a lot of people thought Kassanganai might have done enough there, but Eblen got through it and he got the win. And, for, I suppose, a lot of the Bellator guys, it's been a very, very slow year, Eblen included, I suppose. But although he got in there with Fabian as well, didn't he? Again, we'll talk about that over in the or is it later? It's on the super fight one, isn't it? Yeah, so we'll talk about that later on. But Jason Jackson obviously started the year as the champ and beat Ray Cooper, and then you had Vadim Nimkov against Kapaloza. I think for this fight, and obviously the main event as well, the Francis Ngannou kind of free for all was on. Who's going to fight Francis? And I think obviously Fahey, having won before and winning again here, put himself in the lead. And then Nimkov, up at heavyweight, the talks haven't gone down to light heavyweight again, but him versus Francis is a fight that a lot of people, I think, probably had on their list of like fighters outside the UFC who Francis could fight, and it'd be a good fight. And I think beating Kapaloza the way he did, I suppose, made that made that even more clear, I suppose. Then we had the mad fight, or a mad muscle matchup between Yoel Romero and Thiago Santos. We had AJ McKee getting an armbar over Clay Collard. And this is a long event. Aaron Pico won. Clarissa Shields looked a little bit better. And then we had a couple more fights as well. Abdul Al-Khatani, who obviously we'll talk about more in the PFL Mina show. So that was the super fight one. I think, and just to mention as well for that one, that card could have been so much better than it was. There was a lot of injuries and a lot of things fell through. And, I think we've had cards like that, right, in the UFC this year, where a lot of things fell through and then maybe didn't. But then in a month's time, I suppose you have an opportunity to do another super fight. And in another month's time, whereas the PFL only having them twice a year, it was, it was hard to rebound, I suppose, from that. And when the first one is kind of like, it was still a good card, don't get me wrong, but this could have been a mega card, and I give them credit for that, and they really did try to make it a mega card, but, as I said, a few injuries and things like that, and it didn't really happen, and I think that was an unfortunate way. It was a tough start because of that, and then I think maybe there was a bit of a snowball effect after that, and I really hope, and looking forward, I suppose, I really hope that they can all put it together from the start of next year. And look, they look like they have a pretty good card coming up at the start of the year anyway, so we'll see on that. So let's get to the PFL one show which went down, as I said, on April 4th. The heavyweights and the women's flyweights were on it here. I think what they did with the heavyweights was very smart this year. Now, some of the matchmaking with the heavyweights, I think, is the biggest criticism you can have of the PFL this year. There was a few rematches and just matches that maybe didn't make as much sense. I think in the other divisions, apart from the Liz Carmouche-Velasquez fight, which we saw here, the matchmaking, I think, was much, much better. You know, I think a lot of people are giving out as well. We'll talk about a fight later on, but rematches that happened, and there was only one this year, I think, based on like the point system, like, you know, the Musaya Ramazanov fight, which was a beatdown in the first one, and then they fought again because they both qualified. But that's not really anyone. That's not matchmaking. That's just the point system put them together, and that's very unfortunate. That is a downfall or a flaw of the system, and which is, you know, no system's going to be perfect, but in general, I think the matchmaking throughout the year was very, very good. And I think to you know, go back to the heavyweights, what they did here by giving you Bellator guys and PFL guys in this, but also in the women's flyweight, I think was a good sign for the year. And I think that is a big reason why I think the tournament was actually, or the season was very good this year. I'm always calling it a tournament, the season. From a point of view of a person who, you know, who watched it all and covered it all, we got new fights. You know, we got fights, and we'll talk about more as we go. But like, we got fights we wouldn't have thought of, and I remember as well thinking on over on the betting show, it's like, this is very hard for the bookies to get prices on here, because like, say someone like Moldavsky and Antidalia in the main event here, those lads have been fighting completely different heavyweights. You know, they might have one or two, you know, in 50 fights or 60 fights between them or whatever, common opponents, but not that many. You know, they've been very much separate. Now they're put in together. It's like, oh, who should be the betting favourite here? Who's the better guy here? And I think a few of the smart bettors, and I think us in this one as well, won a bit of money doing that. So it was a good start for the in the main event for Moldavsky, obviously, who beat Antidalia. Then Denis Goltsov went on to get a win, as did Daniel James and Sergey Bellasini. That Bellasini and Ivanov fight, it's probably the PFL fight of the year. You know, with PFL Europe, we might have a different answer, but that was a phenomenal fight, a great fight. Popov obviously got a win there against Steve Mowry as well, and Dimitri was the featherweight, not the heavyweight. Let's talk about the women's division here for a second, because like I'm blue in the face from saying it at this stage, and I people are probably sick of me saying it, but I'm going to say it once more because I think it's worth saying. Like, this is the greatest women's tournament I think that's ever been put on, and without a shadow of a doubt, the best season that the PFL have put on, because every season previous to this was a one-horse race. You know, now it didn't always turn out like that, obviously, because Pacheco beat Kayla once, but coming into that season, it was Kayla. For how many seasons was Kayla there? For 3. You know, this was, oh, Kayla's going to win. Then Kayla went away. Pacheco's definitely going to win, right? So all of those, I think that's what they had. It wasn't it 4 previous female seasons. It was all a one-horse race. Once it turned out not to be that way, but all the way through it was that, right? Whereas this, at the very start, you had Liz Carmouche, you had Juliana Velasquez, you had Dakota Ditcheva, you had Talia Santos, Alira Joanna, Shannon Young, Kanawana Tabe. This was not by any means definitive. Now we look at it afterwards, you know, and we see who won, and maybe retrospectively we could say that. But even still, you know, Talia Santos is no easy out. She pushed Shevchenko all the way. Liz Carmouche has been a champion and won a lot of fights for a long, long time. Velasquez, to me, I have an awful soft spot for Juliana Velasquez. I think she's a fabulous fighter. So that tournament, and the way it turned out as well, I think was brilliant. I think it was absolutely brilliant. So if we're to remember this year for anything, let it be that, I think. Let it be that, because I think they deserve credit for that. And on all the end of the year shows and all, you know, maybe we won't have any much chatter about that, but believe me, I've been paying attention, and I think the fans should too. And if you're listening to this, I think they deserve credit for that. Right, let's get to the second one. April the 12th, we had Impa Kasanganay going in there, making short work of Alex Polizzi in what was a fun fight. Polizzi always brings it, to be fair to him. But with Kasanganay, again, credit to Kasanganay. Like, he fought in that last card. You know, he fought against Johnny Ebden and lost, came in here and won. And I think getting the quick finish was a big part of it. And I spoke to him. I think I might have spoken to him after this, but I spoke to him later in the year as well anyway. And, you know, he was, to me, he looked a bit drained from it. You know, it's been a long couple of years for him because Kasanganay, and he's a lot of stuff outside of the cage as well. But I think this helped him get to the next one and to the next one. And maybe by that stage, maybe it was a little bit too much for him. But anyway, a good start. Rob Wilkinson had a great start as well, obviously moving up in weight to beat Tom Breeze. You know, I predicted at the start of the year that Tom Breeze would do damage, but just, you know, I think Tom Breeze has it all physically, but mentally, I think it's going to be a big issue for him. And then you know, some of those fights that you wouldn't have thought of, Clay Collard versus Patricki, really fun fight as well. What a great fight that was. Again, probably up there with one of the fights of the year. Michael Dufour beating Mads Burnell, one of the shocks of the year, I suppose. You know, Joshua Silveira, again, that was a finger injury, wasn't it? The Sadabusi fight. But he won that fight, and it was a great year for Josh as well. And then we had, you know, Shoeface, who was out of it. He got injured, didn't he, if I'm not mistaken? We had Yashimuradov beating Jacob Ndai. You know, Ndai obviously coming out from PFL Europe, who we had a great year before. And then, you know, Primus, Rabadanov, Espinoza. Very, very interesting to see all of them getting wins here, and pretty good wins as well against good opponents. So that was the second event, and then the third in the first bunch. And that was the lightweights and the light heavyweights, and then the third one saw the welterweights and the featherweights. And this welterweight bracket was absolutely unbelievable. Like the main event, Umalatov beat Koreshkov. You know, coming in, Koreshkov, like, he probably was up there with one of the favourites for this, I would say. He's a top level fighter. You know, Musayev and Storley, I think people realise after this fight that Musayev was the boogeyman in this division, because what he did to Storley, like, he let Storley do what he wanted to do, and then he just decimated him afterwards. It was fantastic. You know, with Yamauchi and Gracie as well, which obviously wasn't the classic. Ramazanov was in this. There was a missed weight in there. Sarapoli was in it as well, and Don Madge and Brennan Ward. But yeah, it was good stuff. Good stuff out of them. Then we had the featherweights, and again, top level stuff. The Lochnan Carvalho fight, probably a bit of a weird stoppage here, which is, you know, tough on Brendan, I think, even more than Pedro, because I think Brendan was about to finish him, but it was a bad stoppage, and I have a lot of respect for Kevin McDonald, but I didn't like this one personally. And then there was wins for Braga, Kai Kamaka, Baruks, Hizriev, who obviously went on to do amazing things, and Tyler Diamond as well. See, at this stage as well, this featherweight bracket, like Lochnan, Braga, Hizriev, Kamaka especially, those guys, they really hit the ground running this year, and like all of them looked phenomenal going through this year. So like, you look at that, the featherweight tournaments, really good. The women's flyweight tournament, really good. And the welterweights, even if we just leave it at that, I thought the light heavyweights were pretty good as well. But even if we leave it at those three, the level in the welterweight tournament was phenomenally good. And this way, like when you paint it out, when you go through it fight by fight here and event by event, you know, I think maybe there isn't an appreciation for how good this season actually was. And I think maybe we look back in a few years and go, geez, there were some good fighters in that, and there definitely was. But then we move on to June the 13th, the fourth fight of the year. This back to the heavyweights and the women's flyweights again. Not a classic main event. Linton Vassell beat Moldavsky, which put a bit of a spanner in the works. I think a lot of people fancy Moldavsky as one of the favourites, and you know, that was a fight that maybe or Moldavsky was the type of guy that maybe could have been a name for Francis to fight, but it went badly wrong obviously here. Goltsov got another win in against Thiago Santos. Popov, who had a fantastic season, got a win. Tyrell Fortune, there was a couple of injuries here, I know, along the way, and Tyrell Fortune got a win. Tim Johnson got a win as well. And in the flyweights, Dakota Dicheva, you know, she just made mincemeat at Chelsea Hackett. Not much of a an issue there. Liz Carmouche against Cannon on the tab. But this to me might be comeback of the year. It's right up there. 8 seconds left in the third round. She had been viciously beaten for the rest of the fight. She came back and she won armbar. With 8 seconds left. Santos got her win as well against Jenna Bishop. That was a split decision. To me, Jenna Bishop, I would love to see her back next year if possible. I have a lot of respect for Jenna Bishop. I think she's a good fighter. And there was a good win for Lara Joanna there as well as Juliana Velasquez, who, Juliana Velasquez had a tough time of it because she comes into this tournament. It's a new lease on life. What happens? They put her in there with Liz Carmouche. She loses again for like the 74th time in a row. And, she got a win here, and it's a pity. Like, she's the type of one that, like, didn't qualify, but you would love to have seen her qualify. And maybe next year, if they do this again, I'd like to see her back, because I think her versus Dacheva is actually probably a better fight than a lot of people realize, I would say. But, however, let's move on to June 21st, PFL 5. Mads Burnell got a really good win here, and he needed against Clay Collard, not the best of years, I suppose, for Clay, but in some very, very good fights. Mads Burnell, one of those guys, though, he'll probably win one of the years, because he's so talented, but it always just doesn't always pop for him in the lightweight division. Bruno Miranda got a good win. Patricki, again, didn't have maybe the best of years. Primus, though, I said from the start of the year, Primus was suited for this, and there's no doubt about it, he was. Rabadanov as well, just going through everyone. Piccolotti beat Dufour, and that kind of set the cat amongst the pigeons a little bit, because Dufour looked like he was going to be a guy, but it turned for him. And in the light heavyweights, Kasanganay beat Indai. That was a tough loss for Indai, but a great win for Kasanganay. Wilkinson got another win over Joshua Silveira. That was a close one, split decision. I think a lot of people had it for Silveira. Yashimurdov got a good win. Palisi again, he beat Shoeface and was good. Good win for Palisi. And Sadibou C as well, upper light heavyweight after coming from welterweight, was victorious there over Andrew Sanchez. And then the last event in June, a top performance from Brendan Loughnane again, got the finish in the second round, and he looked better than ever. This is probably up there with the best performances of Brendan Loughnane's career against a good game guy in Justin Gonzalez, but he looked phenomenal in this fight. And again, the older liables, Braga won, Kamaka won, Khizriev won, and that was that. That was really, really this season in the featherweight division, just those guys winning it, And in the welterweight, you could say the same thing. Storley got back to winning ways here, but you had Umalatov winning, you had Musayev winning, you had Koreshkov getting back to winning ways, as I said again, and good win for Neiman Gracie against Don Madge. I think a lot of people maybe didn't have him in that one. And as well, thrown in here, you had a Lorenz Larkin fight against Alan Dominguez, where it was a vicious knockout there. So that was good stuff there. So we move on to the next batch of fights, which went down in August, the 2nd of August, over in Nashville, Tennessee. Denis Goltsov again. And these were the playoffs, might I add. So to win this, you get to the championship fight to fight for $1 million. Denis Goltsov, Tim Johnson's a dangerous guy coming into this, because he'd very, very little in-cage time this year. He was fresh. Goltsov has been caught before by big hitters, but not this time, and he took apart Tim Johnson, really. Popov again does what Popov does. He takes you down, he destroys you. Sergio Bilasini got back to winning ways here. But those obviously were the main ones. And then in the women's flyweights, Talia Santos was able to get through against Les Carmouche and Dakota Ditcheva. Against Jenna Bishop, this was, maybe people didn't understand or didn't appreciate what Jenna Bishop was or how good of a fighter she is, but when Dacheva did this to her, this changed a lot for me, I think, because I've believed in Dacheva for an awful lot. I spoke to her this time last year and asked her, like, are you the best fighter in the world, before any of this happened. So I know how good Dacheva is, but this was the first fight where she went to prove it. It really, really was, against an uptake in ability of opponent, and what a win for her there. And then there was, obviously in these cards, there's a lot of maybe undercard guys. Cody Law, who's a good prospect, got to win. Derek Sanders, Anthony Ivy, and a few more as well. Then we had the second playoff card in August 16th. Kasanganay again, like you have to respect him, because Kasanganay, I said, maybe the year took its toll in the end, but he went in there and beat Joshua Silveira. It was actually before this, after this, I spoke to him, and I going in there against a guy like Joshua Silveira, who you've already beaten, and you beat him again. Maybe you don't get the credit for that win that you should, because you know, Joshua has improved an awful lot. I think he looked way better this year than he did previously. He's younger in the sport, you know, maybe not in age, but younger in the sport. You know, it's a lose-lose there for him because hang on, you have, you know, a mentally tough fight that's now going to be actually tougher against a guy you've already beaten. But Impa did the job, and he deserves massive credit for that, I think. Yashimurdov, again, did the job against Rob Wilkinson. I think a lot of people maybe favoured Rob Wilkinson in that one, but what a win and what a year for Rabazanov. And then in the lightweights, for Yashimurdov, the lightweights is Rabadanov. He beat Michael Dufour. He finished him in the second round. And Primus again, the sneaky old veteran beat Clay Collard. There was another couple of interesting fights in that. Danny Sabatello against Lazaro Darian, a draw in that fight. You know, Darian nearly knocked him out a couple of times in that fight. Michelle Montague, who's a featherweight, got a win there as well. She could very well be in the tournament next year if they have one. And there was wins as well for Tadjan, who was his second win of the year in PFL. Jordan Oliver, Mads Burnell as well as Baggio Ali Walsh, the grandson of the legend Muhammad Ali. And then the final playoff card. Do you know what? The main event here, Brendan Loughnane against Kai Kamaka. I think this is up there for like technical fight of the year. I really, really, really enjoyed this. And Brendan Loughnane came out in the winning side. I think that was right. I think they got that right. Hijriev against Braga as well. Also, I think we forget sometimes this was a split decision, as was the Loughnane Kamaka fight. But you know, two very close fights here. And you know, if you're you know, like the horse handicappers, if you've 4 horses going over the line and one of them wins by nose, you did your job, you know. And credit to the matchmakers here, they get a lot of they get a lot of abuse, but you know, you've 4 lads here fighting for one place and there was 2 split decisions. That tells you a lot about how close these lads actually were, so credit on that. I think the not so much with the welterweights. It was a unanimous decision for Umalatov, and Musayev beat Ramazanov. You know, that was the unanimous decision. Earlier he had finished him in a fight, you know, where he dominated really, you know, and that wasn't as good of a win, but this is kind of like, we know who's going to win this fight type of thing. On the undercard there, Berkamov won. Barzola got a good win as well as a few other undercards. And then we got to the finale. And it was very interesting because I believe over in America, obviously I'm here in Ireland, but I believe in America they didn't put this on pay-per-view. They put it out so people could watch it, which I think is a very smart decision. And kudos to the crew over there for doing that. You know, it's tough to sell pay-per-views. It's really, really, really tough. And I think by the quality of this card and the quality of the fighters you had on it, I think you're better off having people watch it, see these guys, and maybe tune in for them again next year, because the people who won, right? Hizriev, Decheva, Yashimurdov, Musayev, Rabadanov, and Goltsov on this. The Demina fights are also on this, but we'll talk about that over in the Demina show. We'll leave it for here for now. Those champions, the Goltsov, Rabadanov, Musayev, Yashimurdov, Decheva, and Hizriev, all high quality. Like, let's go through them. Decheva, could she go into the UFC right now and cause trouble? Yes. Could Hizriev? Yes. Could Yashimurdov? It's going to be tougher for Yashimurdov, I think, right? And it's tougher for Goltsov as well, the heavier weight classes. But I think they'd both be ranked, if you want to put it that way. I think Musayev would be close to a title shot very quickly. I think he's that good. And Rabadanov right there as well. So, like, you're talking about high level stuff here. And I think sometimes, you know, maybe we get carried away and like, they don't have the name, or they're not, you know, not flashy or good on Twitter. When you see a fighter who's really, really, really good, you'll want to see them again. You know, and MMA fans will want to see them again. Let's give a bit of credit to MMA fans for sometimes, right? They'll know these fighters are good, and if they see them and they're able to see it, you know, not on pay-per-view, I think that's a bonus, and I think that's good for the PFL. So, again, we go through him. Hizriev, what a year he had. Obviously, they all went 4-0, but like the level of guys he beat, including Loughnane in the finale, like he's 18-0 now. Like, this guy is up there. If you're to do the featherweight rankings, like, I think he's probably, you know, obviously Taporia is number 1, and you have to respect Max and Volkanovski as well, and you have Evloev and Lopez there as well. But I'd probably put him in the mix there somewhere. I'd probably put him like around the Evloev Lopez range. I think he's that good, to be honest. And I'll be honest, I think he beats both of those guys. So this guy is a top featherweight. You know, Ditcheva, there's a lot of people calling her not just the best flyweight in the world. There's a lot of people saying she's the best female fighter in the world, full stop. You know, Kella Harrison has kind of flattered deceived this year. You know, Cyborg a little bit older. You know, Shevchenko a little bit older. Nunes gone. You know, Zhang Weili obviously the other one up there as well, and a few others. But I think there's definitely an argument for it. You know, the way she destroyed Talia Santos here was fantastic, and she's the star. You know, Dakota Ditcheva, I talked about it earlier on, right? If you have great fights and great fighters, that's what you need along with the season. I would be shocked if Dakota Ditcheva wasn't headlining 4 cards next year. Shocked. Not well. When I say shocked, if they do the tournament again, because you know, there's no, you know, no sign of that 100% yet. But if they do it, she needs to be headlining all of those cards, and I think they should do it. I think they should do it because I think there are good women there that were in the tournament this year, and there's a few outside of as well you might be able to sign. So I think they should do it again. Yash Mordov, I think Yash Mordov is one of like the comeback stories because like lost to Corey Anderson over in Bellator, didn't look amazing in that fight, and then came back and beat Kasangan. I hear, you know, really good story for him. I think Musayev is the exact opposite. This guy is the silver spoon, A+ gold standard, and for him to beat Umalatov, who is that too, massive. Like I think Musayev, you know, I actually, you know, I'm going to give my fighter of the year in all of these. I can't split Musayev and Ditcheva. I can't split them. So I'm going to give a dual award, the 2024 Sheehan Joe PFL Fighter of the Year, Dakota Ditcheva and Shemail Musayev. I'm not splitting them. I refuse that. They were both very good. And honestly, Hizriev Rabadanov could have won it as well. Really, the two of those could. Rabadanov is one of those guys. He's just metronomical. He's so good. It's like he's just going to win type of thing, you know. And Primus, you know, Primus wasn't the toughest matchup for him, let's be honest. But you know, him next year, be interested to see. And then Goltsov won. I'm delighted for Goltsov. I think a lot of people are. You know, he's been the bridesmaid a lot, and to be the bride finally here was fantastic. I thought Papa would win that fight, so it was a very, very good win for him there. So you know, interesting, an interesting year for PFL, and you know, those were the champions at the end. And then obviously we had the PFL super fights. We'll talk about the main event. We'll close it on that. But I enjoyed what they did in the undercard there. They had Ibrahimov, who's a star coming through. They had, you know, Paul Hughes. Let's talk about Paul Hughes for a second here. To me, I know, you know, we did the breakout fighter of the year and it was Dakota Ditcheva. I'll be on my vote for Paul Hughes. And there was a couple of votes for Paul Hughes as well, so I think he was probably number 2 in the voting. I don't think Paul Hughes is just a breakout fighter of the year. I think Paul Hughes is in the run for fighter of the year. Like, you beat AJ McKee. Name a fighter better than AJ McKee who has lost this year. You know, there are a couple, right? One that springs to mind, I suppose Ian Gary is one, but like maybe Leon Edwards and a few, but not many. And here's a better question. Name a fighter better than AJ McKee who was beaten by someone who was completely unranked, who had never fought anyone near the top of the division in a top promotion before. I'll tell you what, maybe, you know, Dakota Ditcheva is the other answer to that, maybe, but it's a different situation. There's no answer to that one, and I'll garner anyone to go and find an answer to that. What a year for Paul Hughes! Like, this guy's a star, and I've been telling you for a long time, but this guy is a star, and he's gone in against Usman and Magomedov. I'll tell you what, I won't be picking against him in that one. What a win here! What a performance! This was blow away. Like, in a card with Francis Ngannou and all of that on it, you know, Paul Hughes was a standout. Like, there's no doubt about that. What a year for Paul Hughes, and, you know, breakthrough fighter of the year. The Sheehan Joe breakthrough fighter of the year, but, you know, he was up there in the Sherdog one as well, no doubt about it. We mentioned earlier the Eblen-Fabian Edwards fight here. Closer type of fight here, without a shadow of a doubt, but, you know, was it a little bit too soon for Fabian? You know, I spoke to him before, and he said that was a benefit for it being very soon. In retrospect, in retrospect, I have no problem with the fight happening, but maybe for Fabian himself, it would have been better to wait. Maybe Fabian goes to light heavyweight now. I think that'd probably be wise. But we had Cyborg against Pacheco then. A close fight that probably looked closer than it was. I think Cyborg was pretty dominant in that one. But, could you argue that was the biggest female fight of the year? I think you could. I think it was right up there. Obviously, we had, Grasso and Shevchenko and a few others in the UFC, but that was right up there, no doubt. And, Chris Cyborg's still doing it, and she deserves a whole lot of respect for that, and very good stuff. And finally, let's end it on Francis Ngannou. Obviously, the star, the guy they need on top of these cards. I didn't actually hear any word on the pay-per-view, how well it did or anything like that, but, to have Francis Ngannou in PFL, to have him fight in Fahea, to win the way he did, is phenomenal for PFL. And for PFL as well, you would hope that they'd be able to get him back next year. You would hope that he would be on one of the cards, one of these big pay-per-view cards next year if they do it that way. And you would hope he would have, I think Fahea was a good opponent, and I think they actually promoted him pretty well, and they built him up very well. I think it's going to be harder if you're getting a Goltsov. I don't know if it's possible with a Goltsov. I think you might have to get someone else, whether it be a Rug or whether it be, Bader maybe, but Bader, he's still a champion in Bellator, if that exists, is he? I don't know. I don't know if those belts still exist, if the promotion, what's going on with it. But anyway, Nemkov, I know he's supposed to have a fight coming up, doesn't he? But there's probably someone out there, who he will either become a free agent or some big name will emerge. They need something for Francis, something big. And I honestly, I don't know what it is, but I really hope it happens. So with that, just a quick look ahead to next year before we go on. A very quick. Don Davis has talked about upping the amount of shows, and that's good. They need that. There's no doubt about it in my mind. They need that. But I would be steadfast, and I think he has said as well, that the tournament, the season needs to stay the way it is. Do those 10 events and keep it that way. I would love to see more events, for whether they're called Bellator events or Challenger Series events or whatever it might be, for the younger up-and-comers, with a few more tentpole events, maybe even 4 a year or something like that. Whether you call it the Road to Dubai series or whatever, where the top guys can get on it. But at the same time, I also wouldn't be opposed to seeing, let's say you have your 4 tentpole events and one of them's in May, and Johnny Eblin has a bit of an injury or something, maybe he can't make it in May, and you have a PFL card in June or July, put him on it. Put him on the PFL card. We're all together here, guys. Put him on it, headlining even for the title. I think that would be massive, and I think it'd be very smart. And then get your fighters out there, get your younger fighters, your up-and-coming fighters, put them on these cards. Let's do it. And I really hope that happens in 2025. I really, really, really do, because I've a great soft spot for PFL. MMA needs PFL. The sport needs PFL. And, long may it continue. So we will leave it at that. Thank you to everybody for tuning in. My name is Sheehan for Sherdog.com. I'll see you all next time.